Okay, let's go. One Banshee are supernatural harbingers of death in Irish and Scottish folklore, manifesting as spectral women whose mournful wailing announces the imminent death of a family member. The name derives from the Irish Gaelic bean shea, meaning woman of the fairy mound, connecting these death omens directly to the AUC, the fairy folk dwelling in Ireland's ancient burial mounds and otherworld realms. These entities appear as pale, ethereal women with long, flowing hair ranging from pure white to silver to deep red, depending on regional accounts, typically wearing gray cloaks or burial shrouds that mark their connection to death and mourning. The Banshee's most distinctive characteristic is her keening, a piercing wail called keen in Irish, heard echoing through the night before a death occurs in one of the families she watches over. Resembling the traditional Irish funeral lamentation practiced in rural Ireland well into the 20th century. Banshees attach themselves to specific ancient Irish families, particularly those of Gaelic nobility with surnames beginning with O or Mac, including the O'Neill, O'Brien, O'Connor, O'Grady, and Kavanagh clans, though accounts exist of banshees serving other lineages across generations. The creature appears most commonly at night near the family home, often seen combing her long hair with a silver comb while weeping, or washing burial shrouds in blood-stained clothing at a river ford or stream, actions that mirror the Scottish variant called the Bia or washerwoman at the ford, with Wales possessing the similar Saihirith death omen that manifests as groaning voices heard before disasters. When multiple banshees appear together, their combined wailing signals the approaching death of someone particularly holy or great, a phenomenon documented in folklore accounts of saints, chieftains, and significant historical figures. The Banshee's connection to the EOSC places her within Ireland's complex supernatural hierarchy, suggesting these death omens may be diminished members of the Tuatha De Danann, the ancient gods who retreated into the Hollow Hills after mortal humans arrived in Ireland according to mythological cycles documented in medieval Irish texts. Unlike many threatening supernatural beings in Celtic folklore, the Banshee cannot be stopped, bribed, or avoided through protective charms or rituals, as she serves purely as a messenger rather than an agent of death itself, with her appearance and wailing providing warning rather than causing harm. Literary figures including W.B. Yeats and Lady Gregory collected and documented Banshee accounts in their folklore compilations during the Irish literary revival of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, preserving stories that had circulated orally for generations, with modern sightings continuing to be reported throughout rural Ireland well into the 20th century, particularly in areas where traditional beliefs remained strong and ancient family connections to the land persisted across centuries. 2. Leprechaun are solitary fairy shoemakers from Irish folklore, portrayed in authentic tradition as small bearded men standing between 2 and 3 feet tall who spend their days crafting and repairing shoes, always found working on a single shoe rather than a pair. The name derives from the Irish Gaelic leprechaun, possibly originating from Lethi Brogan, meaning shoemaker, or from the older Luchorpon, meaning small body, though etymological debates continue among Celtic scholars. These creatures belong to the category of solitary fairies, distinct from the trooping fairies or OSC, who travel in groups and maintain complex social hierarchies within their otherworld realms, with the leprechaun's association with shoemaking connecting to Ireland's historical cottage industries and the importance of skilled craftsmen in rural communities. Original depictions of leprechauns from Irish folklore describe them wearing red coats, brown or gray breeches, and buckled shoes, with the now ubiquitous green clothing representing a 20th century transformation driven primarily by American Irish diaspora communities and commercial St. Patrick's Day celebrations rather than authentic Irish tradition, demonstrating how folklore evolves through cultural export and tourism. Regional variations existed across Ireland, with Leinster traditions describing leprechauns as wearing red jackets with gold buttons and tricorn hats, while Ulster accounts sometimes portrayed them in different attire entirely, though these distinctions have been largely erased by modern standardization that favors the green-clad stereotype now dominant in popular imagination. The leprechaun's role as treasure guardian forms the core of most encounter stories, with these solitary fairies possessing hidden crocks of gold or knowing the location of buried treasure, often said to be found at the end of rainbows, though this element appears to be a later addition to the folklore. According to traditional tales, a human who catches a leprechaun can force the creature to reveal the location of its treasure or grant 3 wishes, But the leprechaun invariably escapes through clever wordplay, misdirection, or exploiting the captor's momentary distraction, with the trickster mechanics operating through malicious literal interpretation of wishes or promises where the leprechaun technically fulfills requests while ensuring the human gains nothing of value. Capture methods described in folklore include maintaining constant one contact, as looking away for even a moment allows the leprechaun to vanish. Though successful captures resulting in actual treasure remain conspicuously absent from documented accounts. The relationship between leprechauns and chlorochons, drunken fairy creatures who raid wine cellars and ride sheep or dogs through the night, remains debated in Irish folklore, with some traditions treating them as separate beings while others suggest they represent the same creature in different states, the leprechaun working soberly by day and the chlorochon drinking recklessly by night. Literary documentation of leprechauns extends back to the medieval Irish text Extra Fergus Mac Letty, composed around the 8th century, which describes the Ulster king Fergus Mac Letty capturing 3 leprechauns while sleeping on a beach and receiving 3 wishes in exchange for their release, while modern cultural impact has transformed the leprechaun into Ireland's most recognizable folkloric symbol, appearing in tourism marketing, corporate branding, and international representations of Irish identity. 3. Dullahan, or headless horsemen and death omens from Irish folklore, representing one of the most terrifying manifestations of supernatural harbingers in Celtic tradition. The name derives from the Irish Gaelic dullahan or dullahan, meaning dark man or man without a head, though this translation fails to capture the full horror of these entities that ride through the Irish countryside announcing imminent death. The dullahan appears as a headless rider mounted on a massive black horse, carrying his own severed head under one arm or held high above his shoulders, using the head's supernatural vision to navigate through darkness and locate his intended victims, with the head itself displaying grotesque characteristics including glowing eyes that can see vast distances even in complete darkness. A wide grin stretching from ear to ear, and flesh in various states of decay ranging from pale and waxy to blackened and rotting, with the texture described in folklore accounts as resembling moldy cheese or decaying leather. The creature rides a headless black horse whose eyes glow with the same supernatural fire as the dullahan's severed head, or alternatively drives the coist boathar, the deaf coach or silent coach, a black carriage pulled by 6 headless black horses that moves in complete silence despite its speed and the rough terrain of rural Ireland. The dullahan carries a whip fashioned from a human spine, which he uses not merely as a tool to drive his horse or coach, but as a weapon to lash out the eyes of anyone unfortunate enough to witness his passing, a detail that emphasizes the danger of even glimpsing this death omen, with gates and doors flying open at the dullahan's approach regardless of locks or bars, making him an unstoppable force that cannot be avoided through conventional protective measures. When the dullahan reaches his destination, he stops and speaks the name of the person marked for death, calling out once in a voice that carries despite the distance, and the speaking of that name causes immediate death with no possibility of intervention or reversal. The only known weakness of the dullahan is gold, with even small amounts of the metal causing him to flee in terror, a vulnerability rooted in the broader Celtic fairy folk tradition where the EAUSC demonstrate aversion to gold, providing the sole defense against the dullahan, with travelers in rural Ireland historically carrying gold coins or wearing gold jewelry specifically as protection against encountering this death omen on isolated roads at night. The dullahan's connection to the Celtic head cult, documented through archaeological evidence of head veneration in ancient Celtic religious practices, including carved stone heads at sacred sites and references in classical texts to Celtic warriors collecting enemy heads as trophies, suggests these creatures may represent a folkloric evolution of older religious beliefs about the head as the seat of the soul and source of supernatural power. Regional accounts of dullahan sightings appear throughout Irish folklore, particularly in County Sligo and County Down, with some scholars suggesting the creature may have evolved from the Celtic god Cromdub, a pre-Christian deity associated with harvest and possibly requiring human sacrifice, while the dullahan's influence extended beyond Irish shores with Washington Irving's famous 1820 story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, borrowing elements from Irish immigrant tales of the Headless Horseman, though Irving's Americanized version lacks the death omen function and gold weakness that define the authentic Irish dullahan. 4. Selkie are shape-shifting seal people from Scottish and Irish coastal folklore, inhabiting the cold waters surrounding the Orkney Islands, Shetland Islands, Hebrides, and the rocky shores of Ireland's Atlantic coast. The name derives from the Scots word selch or selk, meaning seal, with regional variations including selkie in some areas and the Irish Ron in Gaelic-speaking communities, though selkie has become the dominant term across Celtic maritime traditions. These beings exist as seals while in the ocean, swimming and hunting among their animal counterparts, but possess the ability to shed their sealskins upon reaching land, emerging as beautiful humans with no visible distinction from ordinary people except for a certain otherworldly quality described in folklore as an indefinable sadness or longing in their eyes that hints at their true nature. The transformation mechanism centers entirely on the sealskin itself, which functions as both the selkie's natural form and a magical object of immense personal significance, with the creature unable to return to the sea without recovering this skin once it has been removed. Selkie come ashore periodically, particularly during full moons or midsummer nights, to dance on beaches and rocky shores in human form, carefully hiding their sealskins among rocks or in caves before engaging in these terrestrial activities, with the most common narrative pattern in selkie folklore involving a human, typically a lonely fisherman or farmer living near the coast, discovering a selkie in human form and stealing the hidden sealskin while the creature is distracted or sleeping, trapping the selkie in human form and creating a captivity situation that forms the foundation of countless tragic tales throughout Celtic maritime communities. The trapped selkie, having no means of escape, typically marries the human who stole the skin and settles into a terrestrial life that appears outwardly normal, bearing children and maintaining a household while the stolen sealskin remains hidden, often for years or even decades, with these marriages described in folklore as containing a persistent melancholy, the selkie spouse frequently standing at the shore gazing out to sea, singing haunting songs, or displaying an inexplicable sadness that no amount of human love or family bonds can fully dispel. The inevitable discovery of the hidden sealskin occurs through various means, with children sometimes finding it while playing, the selkie accidentally uncovering it during household tasks, or the hiding place being revealed through age or accident, and upon recovering the sealskin, the selkie immediately returns to seal form and plunges into the ocean without hesitation, abandoning human spouse and children forever, despite any emotional attachments formed during years of terrestrial life. Some regional variations describe selkie mothers returning periodically to shore to visit their half-human children, watching from the waves or briefly coming to land when the children play near the water, though these encounters remain bittersweet and temporary. While the gender dynamics of selkie folklore show interesting patterns, with the vast majority of tales featuring female selkies trapped by human men, though less common stories describe male selkies who come ashore deliberately to seduce human women, fathering children before returning to the sea of their own volition. The MacCodrum clan of North Uist in Scotland's Outer Hebrides claims direct descent from selkie ancestors, maintaining this genealogical tradition into modern times and historically refusing to hunt seals based on the belief that they might be killing relatives, a taboo that extended to other families in Orkney and Shetland who held similar beliefs about selkie ancestry or relationships, while the literary documentation of selkie folklore includes the traditional ballad The Great Silkie of Sule Skerry, catalogued as Child Ballad 113, which tells of a male selkie who fathers a child with a human woman before prophesying that she will remarry a gunner who will eventually shoot both the selkie father and their half-selkie son. 5. Puka. Paifa are shape-shifting trickster spirits from Irish folklore, pronounced Pooka in Irish Gaelic, representing one of the most morally ambiguous creatures in Celtic supernatural tradition. These beings possess the ability to assume multiple forms, most commonly appearing as a large black horse with glowing yellow eyes that pierce through darkness, though they can also manifest as goats, dogs, rabbits, or humanoid goblins depending on their intentions and the specific regional traditions where encounters occur. The name puka connects linguistically to similar creatures across Celtic nations, including the Welsh pwca, the Cornish bucca, and arguably influencing the English puck immortalized in William Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, composed between 1005 and 1596, though the theatrical puck represents a considerably more benevolent interpretation than the unpredictable and sometimes dangerous Irish original. The puka's most characteristic behavior involves appearing as a horse to solitary travelers on rural roads, particularly near crossroads, gates, or mountain passes, offering what seems like convenient transportation, with those who accept the offer and mount the creature experiencing a wild, terrifying ride across the countryside at supernatural speed. The puka leaping over obstacles, charging through impossible terrain, and generally subjecting its rider to hours of terror before finally depositing them, usually unharmed but thoroughly frightened, in a ditch, bog, or far from their intended destination. This trickster pattern demonstrates the puka's nature as neither purely malevolent nor benevolent, with the creature's behavior toward humans depending largely on how it has been treated by the local community, whether proper respect has been shown, and sometimes simply on its mood at the moment of encounter, operating according to its own inscrutable logic and sometimes offering genuine help or truthful prophecies, while other times engaging in elaborate pranks that cause significant inconvenience without inflicting serious harm. The creature possesses the ability to speak human language in all its forms, occasionally offering advice, warnings, or prophecies to those it encounters. Though determining whether these pronouncements are truthful or deliberately misleading requires careful interpretation and often becomes clear only in hindsight. The puka's connection to agricultural cycles and harvest traditions provides one of the few consistent patterns in its otherwise unpredictable behavior, with November 1st marking Samhain in the Celtic calendar and representing the absolute deadline for completing harvest activities, with any crops remaining unharvested after Samhain belonging to the puka, who either spoils them through supernatural means or claims them as rightful tribute, making it dangerous or unlucky to gather these late crops, a belief that served practical functions in agricultural communities by encouraging timely harvest completion before winter weather made field work impossible. Regional variations across Celtic nations show interesting divergences in puka characterization, with Welsh PWCA traditions generally portraying a more helpful and less dangerous creature, while Irish accounts emphasize unpredictability and potential harm, with geographic features throughout Ireland bearing the puka's name, including puka stone circles and mountain passes where encounters were frequently reported, particularly in County Down and County Sligo, where folklore accounts remain especially rich. The creature's association with liminal spaces, boundaries between cultivated and wild lands, crossroads where multiple paths intersect, and mountain passes that mark transitions between valleys reflects broader Celtic supernatural beliefs about the dangerous power of threshold locations where normal rules become uncertain. With modern Irish literature continuing to reference puka traditions, including Brian Friel's 1993 play Wonderful Tennessee, which incorporates puka mythology into its exploration of Irish cultural identity and the persistence of ancient beliefs in contemporary society. 6. Kelpie are shape-shifting water spirits from Scottish folklore, inhabiting the lochs, rivers, and fords throughout the Scottish Highlands, where deep water poses constant danger to travelers and livestock. The name possibly derives from the Gaelic kelpie or coalpatch, meaning heifer or colt, though etymological origins remain debated among Celtic scholars, with some suggesting connections to older water deity names that predate recorded Gaelic language. These creatures most commonly manifest as beautiful horses, typically black though sometimes appearing as white or gray, standing near the water's edge in locations where their presence seems convenient for travelers seeking to cross rivers or rest their own mounts, with the kelpie's equine form appearing perfectly normal at first glance, often displaying characteristics that make it seem like a lost or stray horse, an illusion designed to encourage human interaction and create the fatal moment of physical contact that triggers the creature's predatory mechanism. The kelpie's most distinctive and terrifying characteristic is its adhesive skin, which causes anyone who touches the creature to become instantly and permanently stuck, unable to release their grip or pull away regardless of strength or desperation, with this supernatural adhesion affecting clothing, hands, or any part of the human body that makes contact, and folklore accounts describing victims realizing their mistake only after their hand has touched the horse's flank or mane and finding themselves trapped against the creature's side. Once contact is established, the kelpie immediately plunges into the water, dragging its victim beneath the surface to drown in the loch or river depths, with the creature then devouring the body, though some regional accounts specify that only the liver remains uneaten, washing ashore as the sole evidence of the attack, while the kelpie can also assume human form, typically appearing as a beautiful young person who lures victims through seduction or offers of assistance, though this transformation is less common in traditional accounts than the horse manifestation that dominates Highland folklore. Warning signs that distinguish a kelpie from an ordinary horse include a constantly dripping wet mane even in dry weather, water plants such as reeds or algae tangled in the hair, an unusual tameness or friendliness that seems inconsistent with a genuinely wild or lost animal, and hoofprints that lead directly into water without emerging on the opposite bank. The only known method of controlling a kelpie involves bridling the creature before it realizes human intent, with a successfully bridled kelpie becoming bound to serve its captor with the same supernatural strength it normally uses for drowning victims, though achieving this bridle placement requires approaching close enough to touch the creature without making skin contact, a nearly impossible feat given the kelpie's intelligence and the adhesive properties that activate upon any touch, with this bridal tradition connecting to broader Scottish Highland horse-taming culture and the importance of skilled horsemanship in communities where horses provided essential transportation across difficult terrain. Regional variations of the kelpie appear throughout Scottish islands and coastal areas, including the Each USJ or water horse, considered even more dangerous than the standard kelpie and inhabiting both fresh and salt water, the tangie from Shetland folklore, and the nuggle from Orkney traditions, each possessing similar characteristics but with local distinctions in behavior and habitat preferences. Geographic specificity in kelpie accounts includes Loch Ness, Loch Lomond, and the River Spey as particularly notorious kelpie habitats, with these locations historically experiencing significant drowning incidents that the folklore helped explain and prevent through supernatural warnings, demonstrating how kelpie mythology served practical functions by encoding water safety knowledge across generations. Modern cultural presence of kelpie mythology includes the Kelpies, a pair of 30-meter-tall steel horse head sculptures installed in Falkirk, Scotland in 2013, which have become iconic landmarks celebrating Scottish folklore, while literary documentation extends back centuries, with Robert Burns referencing Kelpies in his poetry and Sir Walter Scott incorporating Kelpie elements into his 1810 narrative poem, The Lady of the Lake. And architectural evidence includes Kelpie sculptures and carvings on buildings throughout Scotland, particularly near bridges and fords, serving both decorative and warning functions for communities where water safety remained a constant concern. 7. Awassi are a supernatural race dwelling in the otherworld of Irish and Scottish mythology, pronounced Ease Shay in Irish Gaelic, with Shea referring to the fairy mounds or hollow hills that serve as entrances to their realm. These beings represent the most powerful and complex entities in Celtic folklore, possibly originating as the diminished Tuatha de Danann, the ancient gods of pre-Christian Ireland who, according to the mythological cycles documented in the 11th century text Labar Gabala Erin, or Book of Invasions, retreated into the hollow hills and underground realms after being defeated by the Milesians, the mortal ancestors of the Irish people, demonstrating cultural continuity between pre-Christian religious beliefs and later folklore traditions. The Awassi dwell within Shea mounds, which correspond to real archaeological sites throughout Ireland, including ancient burial mounds, passage tombs, ring forts called raths, and stone circles, with specific locations such as Newgrange, the Hill of Tara, and Brú na Bóinne identified in folklore as major fairy residences and gateways to the otherworld realm of Tir na Ena Ga, the land of youth where time flows differently and aging ceases. Physical descriptions of the Awassi vary considerably across regional traditions, with some accounts portraying them as tall, impossibly beautiful, and ageless beings who appear fully human-sized or larger, while other traditions describe them as smaller than humans, though still possessing perfect features, and an otherworldly quality that distinguishes them from mortals, with these fairy folk possessing formidable supernatural powers including shape-shifting into animal or human forms, rendering themselves invisible to human eyes, manipulating time so that a single night in the otherworld equals years or decades in the mortal realm, casting enchantments that compel obedience or love, and controlling weather patterns and crop fertility. The moral nature of the Awassi defies simple categorization as good or evil, with these beings operating according to their own complex rules and customs that often seem arbitrary or incomprehensible to humans, becoming easily offended by perceived disrespect and responding with curses, illness, or misfortune while occasionally bestowing gifts or assistance on those who show proper deference. Interaction with the Awassi carries significant dangers, particularly the prohibition against accepting food or drink offered in the otherworld, as consuming fairy food traps humans in that realm permanently or creates obligations that bind them to fairy service, while the phenomenon of changelings represents one of the most feared aspects of Awassi interaction, with these beings allegedly stealing healthy human babies and replacing them with sickly fairy children or enchanted objects such as carved wood that appears alive through glamour magic, a belief that persisted in rural Ireland into the 19th century and resulted in tragic incidents including the 1895 Bridget Cleary case where a woman was killed by her husband and family who believed she had been replaced by a fairy changeling. Cultural practices surrounding the AUSC include strict prohibitions against disturbing fairy mounds, cutting down fairy trees, particularly solitary hawthorn or blackthorn trees growing in fields, and walking on fairy paths, the invisible routes the AUSC travel between their mounds. With modern construction projects in Ireland continuing to acknowledge these beliefs, roads and buildings occasionally rerouted to avoid disturbing known fairy sites, most famously the DeLorean automobile factory built near a fairy thorn in County Antrim in 1978, which subsequently failed spectacularly, an outcome many locals attributed to disrespecting the fairy tree. Protective measures against unwanted AUSC attention include carrying iron, which fairy folk cannot touch, wearing rowan berries, turning clothing inside out to confuse fairy magic, and keeping bread in pockets, while behavioral rules emphasize never thanking the AUSC directly as this implies debt, never revealing encounters with them, and leaving small offerings of milk or food at fairy mounds to maintain peaceful relations with these powerful and unpredictable beings. 8. Sith. Sith are spectral hounds from Scottish Highland folklore, pronounced Cúisé in Scottish Gaelic, with the name translating directly as fairy dog and indicating these creatures' connection to the AOSC rather than existing as independent supernatural entities. These enormous hounds stand as large as young bulls, with some accounts describing them reaching the shoulder height of a grown man, making them far larger than any natural dog breed and immediately identifiable as supernatural through size alone, with the most distinctive physical characteristic being their shaggy dark green fur, an unusual coloration that marks them as belonging to the otherworld, as green serves as the signature color of fairy folk throughout Celtic tradition. The COO Sith's tail grows long and either braided or tightly curled, another feature that distinguishes it from natural dogs and emphasizes its otherworldly nature, with some regional accounts describing the tail as thick as a ship's rope and capable of leaving distinctive marks when it drags across ground or stone. The creature's behavior centers on its distinctive three-bark pattern, which serves as both warning and death sentence for those unfortunate enough to hear it, with the Cúis Sith hunting in complete silence, moving through the highland glens and mountain passes without making any sound, despite its massive size, stalking its prey with supernatural stealth until the moment it chooses to announce its presence. When ready to claim a soul, the hound releases its first bark, a sound so loud and penetrating it can be heard for miles across the mountains, echoing through valleys and causing all who hear it to freeze in terror, with the second bark following after a pause, giving the victim time to understand their situation and attempt to find shelter, though the distances involved and the remote nature of highland terrain make escape nearly impossible, while the third and final bark signals that death is imminent and unavoidable, with the speaking of this final sound causing the victim's death directly or marking them for collection by the EOSC who command the hound. The only possible defense involves finding shelter, preferably inside a building or behind a closed door, before the third bark sounds, though successful escapes remain rare in traditional accounts and the Cúis's ability to track victims across vast distances makes hiding difficult. The Cúis serves the AOSC as a hunting hound and guardian of otherworld entrances, with its primary function involving the collection of souls marked for death or the protection of fairy mounds and sacred sites from human intrusion, while geographic specificity in COAO Sith accounts includes Glen Coe, the slopes of Ben Nevis, and the Cairngorms mountain range as particularly notorious locations for encounters, with these remote highland areas providing the isolated settings where the hound's three barks could echo for miles without interference from human settlement. The creature's paw prints, described as large as a human hand, sometimes appear in snow or soft ground near fairy mounds, serving as warnings to travelers that they have entered territory claimed by the AUSC, while regional variants of the spectral hound appear throughout Celtic nations, including the Welsh CWN Annwn or Hounds of Annwn, who serve the otherworld king and hunt souls, the English black shuck who haunts the coastlines and country roads of East Anglia, and the Irish Cú Fiel, though the Scottish Cú Sith remains distinctive through its green coloration and three-bark pattern that other variants do not share. Literary influence of Highland spectral hound traditions extends to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's 1902 novel, The Hound of the Baskervilles, which transplants elements of COO Sith folklore to the English moors while maintaining the core concept of a supernatural hound that brings death to those who encounter it, with modern sightings of creatures matching Cú Sith descriptions continuing to be reported in remote Highland areas well into the 20th century. particularly in regions where traditional beliefs remained strong and where isolation of mountain communities preserved folklore that had faded in more accessible areas. 9. Merrow are sea-dwelling people from Irish folklore, inhabiting the waters off Ireland's Atlantic coast and representing the distinctly Irish interpretation of merfolk mythology that differs significantly from broader European mermaid traditions. The name derives from the Irish Gaelic morowad or muroig, meaning sea maid, with regional pronunciation variations across coastal communities in County Kerry, County Cork, and Galway Bay, where merrow encounters were most frequently reported. These beings possess human upper bodies with fish tails replacing legs, webbed fingers that aid in swimming, and distinctive coloration that varies dramatically by gender, creating one of the most pronounced sexual dimorphisms in Celtic supernatural folklore, with female merrows appearing as beautiful women with long green hair, pale skin, and features that make them highly desirable to human men, while male merrows display grotesque characteristics including green teeth, green skin, grey hair, pig-like noses, and overall appearance so repulsive that they rarely interact with humans and are actively avoided when encountered. The Cohuline Druth, a magical red cap worn by merrows, serves as the essential object enabling their underwater existence, functioning similarly to the selkie's sealskin as both transformation tool and vulnerability, with this distinctive red cap, described in folklore as resembling a feathered or scaled covering, allowing merrows to breathe underwater and travel through ocean depths, while removal of the cap forces them to remain on land in human form until they recover it. Merrows can shed both their fishtails and the Cohuline Druth to walk on land as fully human in appearance, though they retain their webbed fingers and the subtle otherworldly quality that marks all Celtic supernatural beings who assume human form, with the transformation pattern creating the foundation for merrow marriage tales that closely parallel selkie captivity narratives. Human men, typically fishermen or coastal dwellers, stealing the hidden Cohuline Druth while the female merrow walks on land, trapping her in terrestrial form and forcing her into marriage and domestic life. These forced marriages follow the same melancholic pattern as selkie unions, with the merrow wife appearing outwardly normal while maintaining a persistent longing for the sea, often standing at the shore gazing at the waves or singing haunting songs in languages her human family cannot understand, with children born from these unions inheriting mixed characteristics, sometimes displaying webbed fingers or toes, unusual swimming abilities, or other traits that mark their supernatural heritage. The inevitable discovery of the hidden Cohuline Druth occurs through various means, and upon recovering the cap, the merrow immediately returns to the sea without hesitation, abandoning husband and children despite years or decades of terrestrial life, demonstrating the overwhelming pull of true nature that characterizes all Celtic shapeshifter folklore. Male merrows, despite their grotesque appearance, serve important functions in Irish maritime mythology as herders of fish, controllers of sea creatures, and agents of storms when angered by human actions such as overfishing or disrespect toward the ocean, while both male and female merrows act as treasure guardians, collecting valuables from shipwrecks and storing them in elaborate underwater palaces described in folklore as containing vast hoards of gold, silver, and precious objects lost to the sea over centuries. The O'Flaherty and O'Sullivan families of Western Ireland claim direct descent from merrow ancestors, maintaining these genealogical traditions into modern times and creating cultural connections between specific Irish clans and the sea-dwelling supernatural beings who inhabit the waters off their ancestral lands, while literary documentation of merrow folklore appears in T. Crofton Croker's 1825 collection Fairy Legends and Traditions of the South of Ireland, which preserved numerous merrow tales from oral tradition during a period when industrialization and emigration threatened to erase regional folklore, with modern cultural presence including merrow statues in coastal towns throughout Western Ireland and tourism centered on merrow legends. 10. Fomorians. Fomorians are an ancient race of chaos giants and sea demons from Irish mythology, representing the primordial forces of darkness, destruction, and natural disaster that existed before the arrival of order and civilization. The name derives from the Old Irish fomor, with etymological interpretations suggesting meanings including undersea, phantom, or dark ones, though scholarly debate continues regarding the precise linguistic origins and whether the name connects to maritime threats, supernatural darkness, or both concepts simultaneously. These beings occupy the foundational layer of Irish mythological cycles, appearing in the oldest documented texts as the original inhabitants of Ireland who ruled the land before the arrival of successive waves of settlers and gods, making them essential to understanding the cosmological structure of pre-Christian Irish religious belief and the symbolic framework through which ancient Celtic peoples interpreted natural forces and historical conflicts. Physical descriptions of fomorians vary dramatically across different textual sources and regional traditions, with some accounts portraying them as grotesquely deformed giants possessing only one eye, one arm, and one leg, emphasizing their monstrous nature and connection to chaos through bodily asymmetry that violates natural order, while other traditions describe certain fomorian leaders as impossibly beautiful despite their malevolent nature, particularly Elifa, a Fomorian king whose appearance is documented as golden-haired and fair-skinned, demonstrating that these beings cannot be reduced to simple monster archetypes, but instead represent complex supernatural entities whose external appearance may or may not reflect their chaotic essence. The cosmic conflict between Fomorians and the Tuatha De Danann, the gods who would later diminish into the AUSC fairy folk, forms the central narrative of Irish mythological cycles and represents the eternal struggle between chaos and order, darkness and light, destruction and creation. The Second Battle of Mag Tuaird, documented in the medieval Irish text Cath Maige Tuaird, preserved in manuscripts dating from the 9th to 12th centuries, describes the climactic confrontation where the Tuatha De Danann, led by the god Lug, defeated the Fomorian forces commanded by Balor of the Evil Eye, whose gaze could kill anyone who looked upon it, with Balor's death at Lug's hands, accomplished through a slingstone thrown with such force it drove through Balor's eye and out the back of his head, killing dozens of Fomorians standing behind him, representing the triumph of order over chaos and the establishment of divine rule in Ireland, though the Fomorians were not destroyed but merely driven to the edges of the world, where they continue to threaten from the margins. Key Fomorian figures include Balor of the Evil Eye, whose deadly gaze required multiple servants to lift his massive eyelid before he could kill enemies, Brez the Beautiful, a half-Fomorian king whose oppressive rule of the Tuatha De Danann led to rebellion and war, and Elatha, the beautiful Fomorian king who fathered Brez through a union with a Tuatha De Danann woman, demonstrating that boundaries between these opposing forces remained permeable despite their fundamental antagonism. The symbolic meaning of Fomorians extends beyond simple monster mythology to represent harsh and unpredictable aspects of nature that threatened ancient Irish agricultural communities, including sea storms that destroyed fishing vessels, crop failures caused by blight or weather, diseases that decimated populations, and the constant struggle against environmental forces that could not be controlled or predicted through human effort alone. If this video stayed with you, like and subscribe.